Let's go Ravens! Something happened behind the scenes with the Baltimore Ravens that could completely change our view of the defense for next season. Several contract clauses were quietly activated over the weekend, and the message they convey about the future of key players on the roster is far more significant than it first appears. Some names that many fans believe could be released now seem to be guaranteed in the team's plans, and this raises a very interesting question about what the Ravens are really building for next season. But before we get into the details, make sure you've already clicked the like button if you truly believe the Ravens can come back stronger and contend for the Super Bowl next season. And I want you to do one more thing. Go to the comments right now and write something positive about the team. Write something like, the Ravens will come back stronger, or the purple and black will rise again, because fan optimism matters more than you might imagine. Now let's talk about what's really happening behind the scenes in Baltimore. According to the latest information, 6 Ravens players had contract triggers vest this weekend, and the implications of these guarantees tell us a lot about who the organization clearly plans to keep moving forward. To begin with, Kyle Hamilton now has $17 million of his 2027 salary guaranteed. Travis Jones has $9 million of his 2027 salary guaranteed. Mark Andrews has $5 million of his 2027 salary guaranteed. None of those names are surprising. These are cornerstone players for the Ravens, and there was never any realistic expectation that the team would move on from them. But things get much more interesting when we look at the next 3 players involved in these contract triggers. The first name that really caught fans' attention is Marlon Humphrey. He just earned a $4 million roster bonus, and when a team commits that type of money, it usually means something very clear. They expect that player to remain part of the roster. General Manager Eric DeCosta had already hinted recently that the organization still envisioned Humphrey being part of the team in 2026, and this move reinforces that belief in a big way. Now, let's be honest about something Ravens fans have been discussing for months. Last season was extremely rough for Humphrey. In fact, many people believe it may have been the toughest season of his entire NFL career. There were multiple moments where he looked like he was getting beaten more frequently than we've ever seen before, and at times it felt like opposing offenses were targeting him. But context matters here. The Ravens' defensive front struggled to generate consistent pressure last season, and when a pass rush collapses, every level of the defense suffers. Corners get exposed. Linebackers get stretched. Safeties are forced into difficult situations. And that's exactly what we saw across the Ravens' defense during that stretch. So the organization appears to believe that Humphrey's struggles were not simply about his ability declining, but about the defensive structure around him breaking down. And that brings us to one of the most important changes happening with this team. The arrival of Jesse Minter in a major defensive leadership role could change everything. Minter has built a reputation for putting players in the right position to succeed, and the Ravens clearly believe he can help restore players like Humphrey to the level we saw earlier in their careers. On top of that, the presence of Anthony Weaver adds another defensive mind to help reshape the identity of this unit. Now let's move to another name that surprised a lot of fans. Justice Hill also earned a roster bonus, this one worth $250,000. While that number is much smaller, it still sends a signal that the Ravens currently see him as part of their running back rotation. Hill missed time last season with a neck injury, but when healthy he has served an important role as the team's third down back. He contributes in pass protection and as a receiver out of the backfield, which gives him value that doesn't always show up on the stat sheet. With Derrick Henry expected to lead the running back room and Rasheen Ali still developing, Hill's role as a situational back could remain important. At the same time, many fans still believe the Ravens could draft another running back in the upcoming draft to complete the group, but the final name on this list might be the most intriguing one of all. Roquan Smith also earned a $4 million roster bonus. And just like with Humphrey, this move strongly suggests the Ravens expect him to remain a centerpiece of the defense moving forward. Over the last 2 seasons, Smith hasn't quite looked like the dominant force many fans expected after his arrival. He has shown flashes of brilliance, including an incredible performance against Cleveland last season where he seemed to be everywhere on the field. But overall consistency hasn't been what fans hoped for. Some of that may again come down to scheme and defensive structure. Under previous defensive leadership, many Ravens defenders appeared to struggle with positioning and responsibilities that didn't fully maximize their strengths. Linebackers like Smith were sometimes forced into coverage situations that simply aren't their specialty. With a reworked defensive philosophy under Jesse Minter, the expectation inside the building appears to be that players like Roquan Smith and Marlon Humphrey could bounce back in a big way. And when you combine that potential turnaround with the addition of Trey Hendrickson to the pass rush and the possibility of more reinforcements along the defensive line, the Ravens defense could look very different next season. And when you really start putting all the pieces together, Ravens fans, you can start to understand why the organization made the decisions it did this weekend. These roster bonuses were not random financial moves. They were signals. Signals that the team still believes in the core of this defense and believes that the problems we saw recently may have been more about circumstances than about the talent itself. Take Roquan Smith, for example. When the Ravens first traded for him, he immediately transformed the defense. His speed, his leadership, his ability to diagnose plays, it was like the entire unit suddenly had a new heartbeat. But over the past 2 seasons, we haven't consistently seen that same level of dominance. There have been flashes, absolutely, but not the constant impact that Ravens fans expected. According to the discussion surrounding the roster bonus, the organization appears to believe that the scheme and the defensive structure played a major role in that decline. If the defensive line isn't creating pressure, linebackers get exposed. They're forced into coverage situations more often. They're chasing plays instead of attacking them, and that's exactly what seemed to happen. Smith was sometimes dropping into coverage against receivers, which simply doesn't maximize his strengths. His best football comes when he's attacking downhill, reading the play, and flying sideline to sideline like a missile. That's where the expectation around Jesse Minter becomes extremely important. Minter is known for building systems that allow defenders to play fast and aggressive without hesitation. Instead of forcing players into uncomfortable roles, his approach is about putting them in positions where their natural abilities can take over. And if that philosophy really takes hold in Baltimore, players like Roquan Smith could look like completely different players next season. Now imagine that scenario for a moment. Imagine Roquan Smith playing freely again. Imagine Marlon Humphrey regaining the confidence and physical dominance that once made him one of the most feared corners in football. Imagine the defensive line actually generating consistent pressure so the secondary isn't left on an island every single play. Suddenly, the struggles from last season start to look less like a permanent decline and more like a perfect storm of problems that hit the defense all at once. And when you add the new personnel into that mix, things get even more interesting. The Ravens brought in Trey Hendrickson, which immediately strengthens the pass rush. Travis Jones is returning and continues developing into a major presence in the trenches. There's also hope that additional reinforcements could arrive on the defensive line, which would only make life easier for the linebackers and the secondary. On the back end, the team added Jalen Hawkins as another safety option, giving the Ravens additional flexibility in coverage packages. This is why those roster bonuses for Marlon Humphrey and Roquan Smith matter so much. The organization isn't preparing to move on from them. The organization is preparing to rebuild the defensive environment around them so they can succeed again. And that tells us something very important about how the Ravens view their championship window. They're not tearing things down. They're adjusting the structure around their core players. Justice Hill staying on the roster also fits into that philosophy. While his role may not always be in the spotlight, the Ravens clearly value what he brings in third down situations. His ability in pass protection and as a receiving back makes him a useful piece of the offensive puzzle, especially when paired with a power runner like Derrick Henry and a young player like Rasheen Ali developing in the system. And let's not forget something else many fans expect to happen. There's a strong belief that the Ravens will draft another running back this year to complete that rotation. Maybe not in the early rounds, but possibly somewhere in the middle of the draft where Baltimore has historically found tremendous value. If that happens, the running back room could become one of the most versatile groups in the league. But at the end of the day, Ravens fans, the biggest takeaway from this entire situation is very simple. Marlon Humphrey is staying. Roquan Smith is staying. Justice Hill is staying. The Ravens are doubling down on the belief that the problems from last season can be corrected with better structure, better health, and better execution across the defense. And if they're right about that, this defense could look completely different the next time we see them take the field. And there's another layer to this situation that Ravens fans should really pay attention to.